examiners are people for now until we get
Yeah.
to the next bit of the conversation, talk about AI taking all our jobs. Yeah, examiners are still people, so you have to convince them. So there's a lot of communication skill involved in being an attorney, especially in any lawyer. Really, a lot of it is a lot of understanding and knowing the legals as well. But when it comes down to it, it's really communicating your point and trying to negotiate or persuade the examiner to see things the way that you see it and allow patents to be granted with a certain scope of claims for protection reasons.
How is the rise of AI going to affect the intellectual property field and patents? What are some common mistakes that GCs make when setting up a patent strategy? Or tips that our guest has learned from years as a patent examiner? Today, we are joined on the abstract by Matt Veale, a European patent attorney and UPC representative. He can tell us what that means at Patsnap. Powered by advanced AI, Patsnap helps IP and R&D teams collaborate and accelerate across their innovation life cycles. He spent about 10 years before joining Patsnap as a patent attorney, and 2 years before that as a patent examiner at the UK Intellectual Property Office. I think this is the first episode of the abstract that we've dedicated entirely to IP and patents and R&D concerns, so I'm excited about this one. Matt, thanks for joining me today.
Nice to be here, yeah, and I hope it's not the last one that you do all on IP.
You'll have to recommend some other great guests. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. I want to hear a little bit about you before we get into sort of how is AI going to affect the IP field. What was it that inspired you to become a lawyer?
Yeah, absolutely. That's always the question. How do you end up as a patent attorney, which is a very specific type of lawyer? So, yeah, it's always a very good question. So, for me, I did computer science at university, and that wasn't enough. I always wanted to be a lawyer, so I did a law degree as well. And then I thought I better get a job combining the two of them. And it just so happens that that is perfect to be a patent attorney or a patent examiner or anyone that works within the IP field. So you take your technical background and apply it to legal aspects of intellectual property and R&D, etc. as well.
And you actually had some experience sort of like working as a computer consultant or IT consultant in computer systems before law school. Do you feel like that sort of experience is really useful? I mean, not just the studying in school, but the sort of like practical application of computer science. Do you feel like that's really useful to the sort of IP work that you do today? Did that help convince you that this was going to be your focus?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in all domains, it's important to get hands-on experience. Being purely academic is never the best way of doing it. It can be useful, but actually getting in the field and getting your hands dirty, if you will, and knowing how to program or how to plug something in is really quite important. And it gives you a breadth of understanding of that when inventors come up to you, you're not just on one side or the other. You really understand where they're coming from and the problems that they're trying to solve.
And I think we'll talk about this a bit as we talk about maybe some of the interesting cases that you've worked on. I guess what does IP law mean to you, right? Because I think this is actually much broader than people might realize. I think most people think of patents or they think of IP today as being like, computer hardware systems, semiconductors, or maybe some like super novel piece of software. But actually, the sort of like realm of what encompasses intellectual property is much bigger.
Yeah, absolutely is. So intellectual property, I would say, not just because I work there, is the most important thing in the world. And if we didn't protect it, then everyone would exploit everyone else's ideas. So whichever company you look at, IP, the biggest ones, IP plays a huge part in that. So unless they're natural resource type companies, and even them have quite a lot of IP in, but your Disneys, your Metas, your
Sure.
Google, Amazon, everyone has very high amounts of IP, and that's IP broadly. So that can be patents, as you mentioned, inventions, etc. But it can be trademarks, it can be designs, it can be copyright, it can be trade secrets. There's know-how. There's the way that they process data as well, which becomes really important now when we talk
Mhm.
about data being the new oil. So IP is
Yeah.
involved in all of that. So some people said to me before, and I think it's probably well known, it's like, if you burned Coca-Cola to the ground, took away all their assets, they keep the trade secret and they keep the brand, they'll be back tomorrow and the biggest company in the world again, or one of them.
Right. Yeah, the recipe is the IP or the logo. It's not the factory. So what was it that led you to go and work for the UK Intellectual Property Office? And maybe also tell us a little bit about what the IPO does. And is it similar to the US PTO? Is it very different? I actually don't know how these things work across borders.
Yeah. Well, if it's good enough for Albert Einstein, it's good enough for me. That's no. So I ended up in the patent office because right place, right time. I saw the advert and I was looking to become a lawyer and go that route. But then the patent route came up, and I saw that and thought that's a great place to go. And the training you get as an examiner, you know, I'm going to try and sound like I'm a poacher here and take everyone from the patent office and turn them into attorneys, or vice versa. But actually, the training is top quality, and you get a breadth of experience by seeing all the inventions come in. You understand the legal process, and that really stood me in good stead before I went out there and became an attorney. So the difference between the USPTO and the UK IPO, size is probably going to be the main one
Nice.
there. So and the amount of patents you're dealing with, but the technical detail, the understanding of the law, how you examine, how you search, all that is fairly the same. But a lot more goes on at patent offices than just search and examination. There's a lot of policy that goes there as well, and you know you know,
Hmm.
carving the path forward for what the world should look like in the terms of IP. And
Are there things that you learned during your time there at the UK IPO that influence or inform how you would recommend people approach filing a patent? Or do you have tips for people if they're, going out and filing their first patent? Hey, do this, don't do that, right? Examiners hate this, that sort of thing.
yeah, absolutely. And you said that examiners hate things. It's because examiners are people. For now, until we get
Yeah.
to the next bit of the conversation, talk about AI taking all our jobs. Yeah, examiners are still people. So you have to convince them. So there's a lot of communication skill involved in being an attorney, especially in any lawyer. Really, a lot of it is a lot of understanding and knowing the legals as well. But when it comes down to it, it's really communicating your point and trying to negotiate or persuade the examiner to see things the way that you see it, and allow patents to be granted with certain scope of claims for protection reasons.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are there differences in, you feel like, the approach between what's happening in the UK, maybe in continental Europe, other jurisdictions around the world? I'm also just kind of curious to learn a little bit more from you about how patent regimes operate on a sort of international level. Like, what level of respect is there for the intellectual property determinations by someone like the IPO or the USPTO?
Yeah, so they're fairly well respected. There's global harmonization.
Yeah.
Unless I really want to get into digging in the weeds around specific case law and how you determine whether something is obvious or not, then that's when you're splitting hairs. But realistically, if it gets granted in one place, it should get granted in the other. But that's not always the case, and I know that. But yeah, subjectivity is where it differs. But there's a lot of objectiveness that is the same. And with AI coming forward, we should have more global harmonization. So yeah.
We'll get to that in just a second. I am really curious to have the sort of conversation around how AI is affecting all of this. Um, I'm sure that some of this is, I don't know, confidential or privileged or whatever word we want to use. But are there any interesting or particularly fun patent applications that you saw that maybe ended up being granted that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I know this one. And the one that I always joke about is the very first patent that I got to allow. And you'd think it was something really inventive, something clever, something high tech. And it really wasn't. Where I started was on bed sheets. So yeah, those things that
Really?
you sleep on every day. But it was really quite clever, and I couldn't find it. But there was a pocket system on the bed sheet that helped the installation, so you didn't hurt your fingers while making the bed. It was inventive, so it
Huh.
went to grant.
Huh. As seen on TV, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
maybe sort of more broadly, you've given us sort of some tips around if you're going to file your first patent, needing to really focus on communication, making your case in a strong way. Um, what about if I'm a GC and I've inherited a few patents, or the last person, maybe the CEO or the CTO or the first lawyer the company had, stood up a little bit of something like IP for the business, but I want to develop a more sophisticated patent strategy. Uh, what are some sort of like things that you think that you need to do, and also how do you sort of create the right process and incentives around this? And my understanding is that oftentimes you need to really incentivize technical stakeholders in the business to bring these ideas forward.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's a good question. And we're moving sort of into the next bit of where I went in my career, which is talking about patent analytics and making data-driven
Uh-huh.
decisions. That's really where we want to get to. And for a long time, that data wasn't really available, like patent data and knowing who's filing where, who's doing what are the acceptance rates, the grant rates, that sort of prosecution strategy that you get, and they're all blended in together. Thankfully, now because of things like Patsnap, it's really easy to get that data and then start to make those strategy decisions going forward. But when you're talking about getting those stakeholders on from the R&D perspective, why do they want to patent things?
Hmm.
Well, historically, we have tried. I think IBM were one of the big ones in that they, for every patent they got granted, they gave everyone a badge or a little bit of of pay bonus. But those sort of
Yeah.
things are still available. But actually, it's it's quite a badge of honor from most inventors to say that's my patent. There's something good about knowing that you have invented something and someone's recognized it and it's gone through the process and you can put it up on the wall. And it's nice to be on the wall, but actually then the next phase comes is that it's good to have a piece of paper, but what are you going to do with it and how are you going to take it into the real world? If you're a single inventor, how are you going to
Hmm.
make some money out of your patent? If you're an
Yeah.
inventor in a large corporation, it's nice to see your product on the shelf.
Totally. Um, I'm sure that you've given GCs over the years, or IP attorneys in businesses, advice about hiring really good outside counsel, maybe cost effective outside counsel. What should folks be looking for from that perspective as they think not just about how do we do this internally, but what sort of resources do we need to make sure that this gets done well?
I could say me self promotion there, but no. uh, what we find with general counsels, they are some of the best lawyers in the world, but they can't do everything all at once. And I think you'll find
Hmm.
in a lot of places that IP becomes very important. Like I said, when IP is such a big value asset to a company, almost most of it, sometimes over 90% of the company is its IP, you probably want someone dedicated to that IP being able to feed up. So, feed to the GC. This is what we know about IP, so you don't have to do it all the time. You've got someone there or a team working on it. What we find in, especially in the UK and maybe Europe, is that there's a lot of attorneys going in house now. That might just be for
Hmm.
lifestyle fit, but because of the amount of attorneys that are out there, the way that things are evolving, the AI, the tools that are available now, external counsel is shrinking. There are good times to have external
Hmm.
counsel. There really is, but sometimes it's nice to have someone IP literate and good in house now.
Interesting. That makes sense, I guess, as you think about sort of competition becoming more intense and businesses becoming more sophisticated, and a realization, I think, in a lot of places that you need more specialists internally, whether it's privacy hires or IP hires or employment hires. Um, let's talk a little bit about Patsnap. You've mentioned the sort of like analytics that might help drive decision making, or data that might help drive decision making. Um, you have a lot of information or data about patent applications across your clients, I suppose. Uh, yeah, tell us a little bit more about like what types of analytics are we talking about, and are there interesting or sort of informative conclusions that you could share with the audience?
Yeah, so that's where we started. 14 more years back was just gathering that data. And as I've said before, data is very important. You put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So actually, a lot of the importance in that, and it is. mostly publicly available patent data, but it's spread all over the place. So collaboration of it, cleaning of it, validation of it, and then doing the value add. Then that's what we're talking about next. Like, now we've got all this data, what can we draw together to make extra value out of that data that we've got? So that really is where Patsnap comes to the forefront. We've done all that hard work, we've brought all that data together, we've cleaned it, we've validated it, and now we're adding value to it. So what are those added values? So they can be simple things like being able to quickly say, what's an examiner's allowance rate? How many patents has X company filed in this field and over how long? And those are sort of things you can then use to drive strategy. That's the analytics side of it, and that's fairly simple. We have image data as well for design patents. We have lots of life science data now, which it's not my background, but we have lots of it. So there's things like you do sequence searching, you can do structure searching. It is really important, especially not just for IP users, but for those R&D users. And there's a gap between R&D and IP. You've got quite lawyery people, and you've got quite innovatory people, and neither of the two shall
Uh-huh.
meet. So that's the position of an IP attorney. So they come in there and try to bridge that gap. And now that you have the data and the tools and the visualization, you can say, when you're doing your R&D and you're inventing, here are all the patents that you can look at and help you to innovate. And then we know all about them, so that when you say, I've got a new invention, what did you look at? How do
Mm-hmm.
we craft what claims we need to say? This is what we built on, this is why it's inventive, and now it'll get through to grant very easy, and you've protected your invention. So that whole workflow becomes a lot more transparent and a lot more easy to use for everyone.
So that's interesting. So, I mean, well, two things, I guess. So, one, so you sort of mentioned how, okay, you don't have a life science specialty, right? You've worked on other areas. That makes a lot of sense, right? You might need to have a pretty technical sort of understanding or a grasp on the ecosystem or industry or the players, the technologies that are there to be a good patent attorney. I guess the follow on question would be, do you feel like with this sort of technology layer or these analytics that that will still be the case in the future, or do you think that IP lawyers will maybe be able to work across more sectors or become slightly more generalist in the future?
So I think, as I said before, like IP touches on a lot of things. So there's
Yeah,
licensing, and that's an entirely separate stream that attorneys don't always get involved in, but might know a bit about. It's contract
sure.
negotiation, there's litigation, not just patent and draft and file, talk to examiners. There's that big world out there that we talk about. So yeah, and I'm sure there are cases of where the IP guy has risen up through the company and become a CEO or something, or CTO, or whatever it might be, because yeah, knowing about what's valuable is valuable, and so yeah, IP is important,
Hmm.
and I'll bang that drum, and just because I'm an IP guy, so, but I think it is.
Where does AI fit into this? Is it? Are you thinking about this from it's sort of like machine learning that's processing all of these designs and drawing, discerning patterns? Yeah, like tell us more about where AI fits into the sort of patenting process you think in the future, or maybe even slightly now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's coming for all our jobs, and it's only a matter of time. Um, there's a doom and gloom version of that, but from my point of view, and from being a computer scientist by background as well, knowing the difference between what's being marketed as AI and what actually computer
Hmm.
science would say AI actually is, and what OpenAI is and Google are all on media at the moment saying we've got artificial super intelligence coming. What they actually are very good tools, and they haven't been. And the old saying is, a bad workman blames his tools, but great tools elevate the craft. So AI is here, and we have to start using it. But we need to know what
Hmm.
the right AI tools to use are, and we need to know a lot more about them so that when we use them, we're safe and correct in the
Hmm.
application as well. So you've mentioned security being an important thing. It is very important when it comes to AI, and when you're asking AI with confidential material, can you trust it? Do you know where it's going? Is it safe?
Sure. I think that. well, it seems like an area where AI could help in the sort of patenting processes around the diligence, I would assume, looking across what's been filed before. Are you already using AI in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Patsnap at least has a co-pilot built into it now, so you can ask it questions in natural language. Say, tell me about patents related to X, and it will bring that back in a consolidated manner using a bit of generative AI to actually write paragraphs for you, which is really good. There's patent drafting tools coming, which again, when I say it's a tool, it automates the work, and yeah, anyone that's ever made something
Yeah.
never starts from scratch. You might start from scratch once, but the second time you do it, you copy and paste and then start to edit. So if you've got a
Uh-huh.
tool that can have all these things you've done before and go, actually, maybe you'd like something like this to do it again, and then again, the skill becomes that top level bit, the value add. So the
Hmm.
routine gets taken out of it, the bulk of write the description, say what everything is, and then actually you get down to the craft and the skill of the attorney, which is drafting those claims. You can get AI to help you
Hmm.
along the way, same way as examiner. So if you're searching for a patent, we all knew that you type the words in, your first search string is going to get 90% of the best results, and then you spend the
Right.
rest of the time trying to make sure you've not missed anything. So that's literally all that AI and tools are doing at the moment. Is really speeding it up, making you more productive. So it's not a bad thing, but it's not taking your job entirely. You just have to adapt to the world that we're in. Same way as people when the internet came
Right.
out, I suppose.
Yeah. I think about this as, I guess the narrative could be, oh my gosh, AI is going to allow for sort of like the democratization of patent application filing, and lots of people will be able to do this from home. And I mean, I don't know, maybe there's a world in which that's true at some point, but it's probably more likely that maybe this is more like do not pay. I don't know if you've seen that. There was a recent case about this. Like you might want to use do not pay to fight a parking ticket, but you're probably not going to want to use do not pay to sue the builder who installed a defective swimming pool in your backyard, because he's going to go out and hire an attorney, and it's going to poke a bunch of holes that like the AI just didn't quite think of, or didn't have the nuanced expertise to be able to understand. Yeah, how do you think about that? How do you think about AI in this landscape being a tool for lawyers versus being a tool for the technologists themselves, let's say, or the inventors themselves?
Yeah. So when you've got things like that, you're talking about maybe low risk, low cost. That's when you're going to want to
Yeah.
apply your AI. When you've got high risk and low cost, you still want to go to an attorney. You have to find the budget somewhere. If it's high cost and high risk, you don't want AI
Yeah.
anywhere near it. So depends how much risk and liability is involved in all these things, and that's why there's always going to be a lawyer there somewhere, because they have to pick up the risk at the end of the day. So you can't just outsource everything to AI. But you're right. Things like fight my parking ticket by just getting it to draft some routine that it knows quite well that works, then that'll work. But what you end up with is an arms race. So who has the better AI? Who's using it first? And you can apply that to the patent office. So you mentioned sort of like individual inventors being able to file their own patents with the help of AI. Probably what's going to happen there is they're going to end up filing rubbish, and the patent office is going to have to find a way to combat that as well.
Okay, one last question for you, Matt, on AI and IP. Do you think at any point AI will end up being leveraged by the other side, by patent examiners in their work?
Yes, by necessity, everyone will
Yeah.
be using AI. Um, so I think I talked about this before about the AI arms race, basically, which is
Sure.
all domains and all fields. Someone who has AI will be far ahead of someone who doesn't, whether it's something like the race for quantum computing and the ability to do that. If you have what OpenAI are calling artificial superintelligence, they know how to build it and it's coming. They're going to be racing Google for whoever can make artificial superintelligence. It's been well known now that R&D users that use AI innovate faster. They file more patents. There's I think a Harvard Business Review study out in the last couple of weeks that show that. I'm sure that is not just anecdotal, that will be repeated across everywhere. Myself, I use generative AI to help me write scripts, write posts, take notes, so it's embedded into my workflows now. So everyone will be using it, and I think I go back to the point I said before. The most important part of it is ensuring you know what you're using, so ensuring that it's
Mhm.
confidential, ensuring that it's not biased, and ensuring that you take care of any hallucinations, because you don't want to go in front of a judge and make up cases to you, which has been known.
Yeah, that was a bad one. That was amusing, but yeah, not good for the
But yeah,
client.
yeah. No, back to the
uh,
question, with the officers use AI, they already do. It's soft AI.
oh,
Will they use like semantic search type tools, natural language processing, that sort of stuff is already in there. Will they use more of it? Yes, it will just come iteratively. Until, do I think they'll completely get rid of examiners, for example? No, but they will use it to help them manage the workload from both sides.
before I get to some fun questions for you, if folks want to get connected with you or hear more of your content, where should they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to go.
Yeah, me too. All right, I've got some fun questions for you as we start to wrap up. The first is, what's your favorite part of your day to day?
Seeing new inventions, it always has been. The weird and wonderful. The weirder the better, generally. You never know what someone's going to invent, because that is in its nature. So they come up with an idea, they'll tell you how they've come to it, and it's the cleverest and bizarrest things. Sometimes you never know where it's going to come from, where inspiration strikes. And that's why I don't think we're in trouble from AI yet, because they don't get the breadth of experience that humans do.
Totally. Okay, I think this one's kind of fun. Do you have a professional pet peeve?
A little bit of a pet peeve. I don't think I've gone a day in my working career without explaining, even to myself, the difference between patentability and freedom to operate. Can you have a patent, and can you take your product to market? They're not the same. There's a lot of overlaps there about who has what, but they're not the same.
And folks can call you up if they want a clear explanation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you have a book that you would recommend to our listeners? And this doesn't have to be about AI or intellectual property. It could just be something fun that you've read recently, but it also could be something professionally related if you want.
I enjoy The Daily Stoic. I think that's a good book to
Oh,
help me think about the work that I do and just navigate general life.
yeah. I've listened to some interviews with his name's Ryan Holiday, right? Listened to some interviews with him. I haven't read the book. I'll have to add that one to my list. And as we start to wrap up, a final question for you, my sort of traditional closing question for my guests. It's, if you could look back on your days as a young lawyer just getting started, what is one thing that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then?
Oh wow, I don't think about that enough. Is the honest answer. So what is it? Just keep on going. Just words. There's no real words of wisdoms. Nothing that I know now that I shouldn't know then. Just support always, and rely on your friends and family, and you'll get there.
Well, Matt, thanks so much for joining me for this episode of The Abstract. This has been really interesting for me to learn a lot more about the IP space, and it's been fun too.
Great. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.